Hi everyone! My name is Natalie DC. Welcome back to my channel. I am a reader, writer, and artist here to talk about books with you, and art, and maybe a little bit of writing. In today's video, I will be doing a wrap-up of all of the purple books that I read in the month of June. Happy belated Pride Month, by the way. I read a total of 6 purple books in the month of June, so hopefully this will be a bit of a shorter video than my previous wrap-ups. As a side note, this will be my last Rainbow Reading Challenge wrap-up until probably the end of September, as me and my family will be traveling the rest of the summer, so don't expect any wrap-ups until then, but I still have some videos planned. No worries. I plan on doing a mid-year freakout tag as well as a couple of other exciting video projects planned, so stay tuned for those. If you're looking for more bookish and artsy content, you can click the subscriber button. Without further ado, let's get started. As I said, I read a total of 6 purple books this month. Some of them better than others, some great ones, some not so great ones, so hopefully this will be an entertaining watch for you. The first purple book that I read in the month of June is Paper Planes by Jennie Wood. This was an ARC that was gifted to me by NetGalley, so thank you to NetGalley for that. This is a young adult graphic novel that follows 2 queer teenagers who are sent to a summer camp for troubled youth after a life-altering incident. It is an emotional, reflective graphic novel that explores themes of identity and friendship. One of my favorite parts about this graphic novel is the art style. I really adored the beautiful, stunning, gorgeous art throughout this graphic novel. And I love the use of color as well. As you know, I love graphic novels that don't just have colorful art on the outside but also have colorful art in the inside, and this graphic novel is no different. I really adored the art style. I also really love the paper plane, as the title suggests, motif that is used throughout the graphic novel to be used as a metaphor for the 2 best friends who have dual POVs, them communicating with each other using paper planes thrown back and forth to each other at the summer camp. Speaking of dual POVs, while I'm usually a fan of more than one POV in stories, especially if it's needed, I actually did not care for the dual POVs of this story. Let me explain. I found myself much more engaged with Dylan's story than Layton's story. Layton is a more privileged character. She comes from more wealth than Dylan and therefore has less barriers to success as Dylan, and therefore I found Dylan more relatable and just more, I'd say, well-rounded as a character. I felt by the end of the story, no spoilers of course, but I felt that Dylan had more character growth than Layton, and therefore I didn't see a point to Layton's POV. We still could have had her as a character, of course, because the story revolves around Dylan and Layton's friendship, but I didn't feel like the story benefited from Layton's POV all that much. But that's just my opinion. As I said, I really enjoyed this graphic novel for the most part, and as well as the non-binary and ace representation. That's definitely to be noted. Overall, I really enjoyed this graphic novel. I felt it was a cute, mostly feel-good read that I would highly recommend. I gave it 4 stars, and yeah, I'm looking forward to checking out the author's future works. On to the next one. The next purple book that I read in the month of June is Beyond the Gender Binary by Alok, Vaid-menon. This is a pocketbook that is basically a collection of essays by artist, poet, and activist Alok Vaid-menon. It explores the author's gender non-conforming identity and discusses possibilities that exist beyond the gender binary, as the title suggests. This was a very quick read, and it is essentially, as I said, a collection of essays. It has some of the author's own experiences as a gender non-conforming person sprinkled throughout, but it mostly has more factual based arguments that discuss the validity of transgender rights. With that said, I found the talking points that are discussed very clear and succinct, so I would definitely highly recommend this little pocketbook for anyone who is a beginner to this topic of discussion, as it has many of the common points of why this movement should exist neatly laid out for anyone who is sort of a beginner to this topic. With that said, I am not a beginner to reading about transgender rights and issues, so I would have loved if this book was delved a little more deeper into alok vaid-menon's personal life. Of course, that is totally up to them, how much they want to share of their life, but I would have preferred if this veered more memoir than list of statistics. I also wish there were a few more visuals throughout the book. As you see with the cover, it is very beautifully illustrated, and I would have loved if we could have seen illustrations or even photographs of the author themselves in all their gender non-conforming beauty. I felt that would have really added to the story that is being told. Overall, however, I did enjoy this little pocketbook. I felt it was a very quick, informative, and impactful read, so I would definitely recommend it for anyone who is a fan of alok vaid-menon or wants to learn more about them, or just transgender rights issues in general. And yeah, I definitely plan on checking out more of the books in this pocketbook collective series, as well as more of alok vaid-menon's writing. As I said before, the author is a poet by trade, so definitely plan on checking out their poetry. But yes, another quick one. I gave it 4 stars. On to the next one. The next purple book that I read in the month of June is Side Effects by Ted Anderson. I loved this graphic novel / comic about young adult Hannah, who is going to college for the first time away from home, and she is struggling with anxiety and depression. So after a particularly bad panic attack, she is prescribed medication, but with each new medication she tries, there are unexpected side effects, aka Hannah gains superpowers from each of the different medications that she tries. And I just really enjoyed this story. I felt it was such a creative and unique way to discuss issues of mental health, and I found it very relatable as well. Hannah is probably one of the most relatable characters I've read this year. I just relate to her so hard, and I really adored her and her partner Iz's chemistry with each other. Spoiler, this book is gay, so bonus points for that. But yes, really love this book. It is very short, but still super impactful. The art is beautiful. Again, another case of a graphic novel having all of the beauty on the inside as it is on the outside. And yeah, I really enjoyed this graphic novel much more than I expected, mainly because it discusses mental health in a way that doesn't rely on a lot of melodrama or tragedy in order to still be a story about perseverance and self-love. And I really respect that of Ted Anderson, and I'm really glad that this book was made, and probably one of my favorite graphic novels of this year, if not of all time, because yeah, this book is just super near and dear to me. So needless to say, highly recommend. I gave it 5 stars. I really enjoyed it, and I would highly recommend it if you resonate with any of the themes discussed. On to the next one. The next purple book that I read in the month of June is Transmogrify 14 Fantastical Tales of Trans Magic by Haron Davis. This is a highly anticipated collection of fantasy short stories written by and for queer, trans, and non-binary authors, some of whom I've already read, some of whom are new to me, all edited by non-binary editor Haron Davis. Once again, this was definitely a highly anticipated read due to this book featuring stories by some of my fave YA contemporary authors, such as Mason Deaver, Corey McCarthy, and Emery Lee. So I was definitely looking forward to reading this, and I don't think this really disappointed. From the stunning cover to the diverse range of stories that are told, to the heartfelt messages of belonging and inclusivity, this collection is both lighthearted and definitely awe-inspiring. The amount of world building that is done in these 30 to 40 page short stories is truly something to aspire to. I won't lie, I did prefer some stories over others. Some stories definitely were more slow-paced and I wasn't as engaged with them, but others really gripped me, and their world building and magic systems really captured my attention. Some of my fave stories from this collection: Halloween Love by Sonora Reyes, Dragons Name Themselves by A.R. Capetta and Corey McCarthy, and Genderella by Mason Deaver. Well, I do wish, like some reviewers on Goodreads have mentioned, that this book had more trans femme perspectives, as this was mostly compiled of trans masc and gender non-binary voices. And I also wish we got to see more of these magic systems and world building on display. As I said, there is a lot of that done within these very short stories, but I wish we got to see more of those. That was put more on the forefront, though I do understand that these stories at the end of the day are meant to discuss themes of transness. Despite this, I was super engaged with most of the stories that are told. I can't really think of many stories that I wanted to skip. I found it definitely a pleasurable read, despite the sort of intimidating amount of pages. I believe there's over 400 pages in this book, but it goes fast with the very short stories that are told throughout. I definitely recommend this collection of short stories, especially if you're interested in stories that highlight gender non-conforming, non-binary, or trans masc identities. As I said, not a lot of trans perspectives that are featured in this collection, but again, I felt it was still diverse and a wide range of stories that are told. So if you're looking for more of these voices in YA fantasy, I would highly recommend you check out this book. I gave it 4 stars, so again, definitely a pretty solid read. And yeah, I'm super glad that I got to read it for this month's Rainbow Reading Challenge. On to the next one. We are already down to the last 2 books of the month. However, these sections might be a bit longer because these books I had some thoughts on. The next purple book that I read in the month of June is Acting the Part by ellor. This is a YA contemporary romance that follows a young actor. I will be referring to them by Frey because this is the name that they choose at the end of the book, so apologies for slight spoilers, but that is the name they choose at the end of the book. So while for the majority of the book they go by a different name, I will be referring to them as Frey. So Frey is struggling with their gender identity as well as toxic bosses that they work with on the set of the Morgantha, I think that's how you say it, fantasy series that they're acting in. They are the star of the show, as well as their very managerial mom who is more of a manager than a mother to them. All while this is happening, they find themselves falling in love with their co-star. So definitely a lot going on in this book already. I definitely had low expectations for this book, just to be transparent, because this book does have a very low rating, like an alarmingly low rating on Goodreads. I think it has like a 2.75 or something. So this definitely scared me. I was not deterred enough to not read the book, if that makes sense. I was still curious about the story. I thought it was very unique. A queer romance that takes place on the set of a queer fantasy TV show. I thought this was pretty intriguing, so I wanted to check it out nonetheless. While this book wasn't as excruciating as the reviewers suggest, I still found myself giving this book 2.5 stars. Let me explain. Firstly, the main character, Frey, is very privileged and very unlikable. They come from a very privileged background compared to many of their peers, and they, throughout this book, learn about a lot of circumstances that they don't have to deal with, such as racism, poverty, and having unsupportive parents of queer identities. These are all things that they don't struggle with, and we are in this character's POV for the entirety of the book. So it gets pretty exhausting having to read about them learning what racism is. Like, it's a bit not relatable. It's not it, in my opinion. And I just found them unlikable in general because of that. Secondly, there is a very clear lack of chemistry between the main character Frey and their co-star slash love interest, Greta. I found myself enjoying their banter as friends and not as partners. For the majority of the book, they kind of bicker, and it's not romantic bickering. It's more like, I don't like you bickering. So yeah, not a good sign when you're not shipping the characters that you should be shipping. Thirdly, there are many problematic lines of narration that are just casually thrown around this book and go unchallenged for the most part. I, as a reader, just did not appreciate and took me out of the reading experience entirely. I will give you some of these lines of narration just so you have an idea of it, and also because they've already mostly been spoiled by the reviewers and Goodreads, so I don't think I'm spoiling anything by giving you these lines that particularly irked me. There are many lines that imply that girls are the only ones that develop eating disorders, yuck that you can't be non-binary and a lesbian. As many people pointed out in the Goodreads review, this is definitely a crux of Frey's kind of inner turmoil with their gender identity, because they've always identified as a lesbian, but suddenly they start feeling like they're non-binary, so they're like, oh, like I can't be non-binary and a lesbian. It's like, no, there are many non-binary lesbians, as the reviewers in Goodreads pointed out, and I definitely agree with. So that was definitely a not so good insight on the author's part. There is a line that implies that scissoring isn't a real thing, as well as a line that implies that a non-binary person dating a cis girl is somehow a straight relationship. No. So yeah, all these lines are definitely no-nos in my book. There are definitely a lot of lines that Goodreads reviewers point out that are also pretty bad. This, combined with apparently the author's past on Twitter of just going on lesbophobic rants, definitely not a good look, so I definitely did not appreciate that at all. Other small, I guess smaller things that I didn't like about this book: the weird pacing. Some scenes would take forever to get through, and some scenes that are more important, we would just breeze right through them. There are many predictable plot points as well. Specifically, there is a major plot point that isn't revealed until the end. It's sort of this like big reveal, but I saw it coming from the very beginning, so definitely very predictable. And while others might have been taken off guard by it, I feel the majority of readers probably would have seen it coming as well. So definitely not good that your big reveal is, for the most part, very predictable. There are many useless characters throughout this book. We see them in maybe 1 or 2 scenes, and when they're mentioned, we're expected to know who they are, when in reality, they showed up at the very beginning of the book for like 1 paragraph, and we are supposed to remember as a reader. Like, it's just not realistic. If you're gonna have characters that are brought up later, you should probably establish them as more important than just like a paragraph or 2. So yeah, did not appreciate that. Just a lot of characters that are unnecessary and take away from the story of the main characters. Finally, the ending, which I've also seen a lot of Goodreads reviewers talk about. It is very unsatisfying. I will spoil it a little bit, so if you don't want to hear it, you can skip to the next book. But if you don't care, just keep watching. Basically, at the end of the book, the main character hates the working conditions of the show that they're on. They hate that their co-star, aka one of the only queer representations on the show, are going to be killed off by the writer. And they also hate how the showrunners treat the POC characters that are present throughout the show. Such as making the black male character become more violent as the show goes on, as well as having the Asian character be a villain. All of these they're not okay with, so at the end they decide to quit, and that's it. We never see the show improve. Played off as sort of a victory for the main character, but their whole thing was like, oh, I'm gonna fix the show, but at the end nothing is fixed. They just left the show. Definitely did not appreciate that, because like for all of that buildup of like, oh, we're gonna fix this show, the workers are gonna take matters into their own hands and demand that their characters are treated fairly and with respect, and at the end nothing comes of it, and we are just expected to root for the main character as we always do, which again I didn't appreciate because I didn't like the main character. So yeah, definitely a very unsatisfying ending in my opinion. So in the end, while I did appreciate the queer representation of this book, as well as the unique way in which this queer romance was trying to be told, I felt that the execution of the story fell flat in my opinion. In the end, I felt that the book was just trying to say way too much, trying to do way too much with all these different plot points and characters, and in the end, the book ended up saying not much at all. So if you're still interested in reading this book, just be aware of all those things I just mentioned, as well as the author's past that I also mentioned. But personally, I would not recommend this book. Again, I gave it 2.5 stars. I'm sort of glad I'm reading bad books because I want to balance out my ratings, because I feel like I'm always giving books high ratings, and also I like reading bad books sometimes just so I can see what's not working for me as a reader, if that makes sense. So yeah, I don't regret reading this book, but I would not read it again. On to the last purple book that I read in the month of June, which is I Miss You, I Hate This by Saedi. I hope I'm pronouncing the author's name right. This book is sort of the opposite of the last book that I read, because that book I expected not to like. This book I did not expect that I was not gonna like. Let me explain. This is a YA contemporary book that follows the lives of Parisa Nafisi and Gabriela Gonzalez. They are best friends. They're high schooler. Parisa is a privileged Iranian American, and Gabriela is an impoverished Mexican American girl. They both come from very different backgrounds, but they're still best friends until a global pandemic hits. Yes, this is a pandemic book, except it's not COVID. It's a virus called edema that, opposite to COVID, impacts young people. So as the best friends quarantine apart from one another, they have to learn to love themselves amidst all this loneliness. They struggle to remain friends through this isolated time. And ultimately, this book discusses the risks that we take in order to live. As I said before, I was not expecting to not enjoying this book due to the gorgeous cover, the reviews. With the last book, because of the reviews, I was expecting not to like it, but this book actually had overwhelmingly positive reviews. I struggled to find any negative reviews of this book, hence why I thought I was definitely going to love this. In addition to the relatable, timely subject matter, while I'm not always a fan of pandemic books, I find that when done right, they really do pack a punch. My main gripe with this book are the characters, unfortunately. I enjoyed the story, I was engaged with the story, but the characters are where my gripes fall. Specifically, I did not like either of the characters, specifically Parisa. She is very tone deaf and very unaware of her best friend Gabriela's problems. Similar to the previous book, I did not think there was much chemistry between Parisa and Gabriela as far as friends go. And this is mostly due to the text messages. We see a lot of text messages that are sent between one another as they're quarantining apart, so of course their main communication is going to be texting. However, their texts are not relatable as teenagers. They use proper punctuation, proper capitalization, and almost no slang. So yeah, I did not find that relatable. This book was only written like last year, so I was very taken aback by the very dry ass texts that are sent between these two teens. Like, come on, they're going through a pandemic, they're Gen Z, they're supposed to be silly and goofy and wacky. I've read my little sister's texts, and I've sent silly, goofy, wacky texts myself as a Gen Z person. So yeah, this was not cutting it for me. This was giving millennial, trying to connect us to teenagers. Like, it wasn't it. This book did not have that banter, that back and forth that I was really craving for these characters to have as best friends, and therefore I did not find their friendship believable, and in the end I wasn't rooting for them to keep being best friends, because that's what this book is all about, like if they're gonna be best friends by the end of this pandemic or not. Spoiler, they are, but and I just didn't find myself enjoying their moments together. I found their individual stories more compelling. In addition, there are a lot of annoying narration moments and just plot points throughout. I'm going to give you some examples, but if you don't want to be spoiled anyway, you can just skip ahead. If you don't care, just keep watching. Parisa has an emotional affair with her older sister's boyfriend. And another thing I hate about this book, all of the characters are insecure. Not just Parisa and Gabriela, but also characters such as Parisa's older sister, Neda. When Neda finds out about Parisa having an emotional affair with Neda's college boyfriend, Parisa is underage, by the way, Neda blames Parisa and is like, how could you do this to me? You're my sister. Like, and while I understand those feelings, like, wouldn't your first instinct as an older sister who just found out that her boyfriend was cheating on you with your underage sister, wouldn't your first instinct be like, oh, I hate this boyfriend, fuck him, like, why, this is illegal? Like, I don't understand. Like, my first instinct would be to blame the boyfriend, not my underage sister. Like, it just did not make sense to me as an older sister at all. So yeah, that was strike number one there. Not so much on the part of that was an annoying thing for Parisa to do, because she was continually flirting with this man, instead of just minding her own goddamn business and writing her college essay. So yeah, faults on her for that, but also in the end it wasn't her fault, it was the boyfriend's fault, and the blame was put on her in the end by her older sister, which I did not appreciate and I did not think was realistic at all. Another plot point of Parisa's I didn't like, there is a moment where she makes up stories about her parents being high all the time to her online therapist. Wild behavior. I know it's a pandemic, I know she has crippling anxiety, trust me, I do too, honey, but I'm not going to go to my online therapist and be like, hey, my parents are high all the time, I hate it, like, it's spreading gossip and rumors about them that aren't true. Like, this is mostly played as like a comic relief scene, but I did not find it funny at all. Like, your parents spent money for you to go to this online therapist and you're just lying to them for the most part. Like, I don't know, maybe I've outgrown YA, guys, because this isn't it for me. Moving on to Gabriella, some of the annoying narration moments, because there isn't really plot points that annoyed me really, mostly just narration moments. There is a moment where Gabriella, she has a boyfriend named Wes and they start dating during the pandemic. And there's a moment when Wes reveals that he often wears this sweatshirt. It was his mother's, and she has since passed away, so he often wears it to get comfort from it and to grieve her. And Gabriella has this moment of narration being like, oh, like, he loves his mother so much that he would wear a woman's sweatshirt. Like, how is that what you took away from him discussing this very sensitive topic? He's like, oh yeah, I wear my mother's sweatshirt to grieve her, and you're like, oh wow, you must really love her if you're wearing a woman's sweatshirt. Like, what? It's a sweatshirt. Weird behavior, again. Another moment that took me out of the reading experience from Gabriella's POVs is when she's talking about her relationship with God and how she thinks that God is non-binary, which, same, me too. But then she says, God should use them, they pronouns. Them, they. No one caught this during editing. No one. Not one person caught this during editing. It's like, hey, maybe we should switch around the they and the them. A bunch of old people are trying to write teenagers and it's not working, guys. It's not working. While all these moments, while they might seem minor to the average reader, especially amidst this story where a lot is going on, trust me, a lot is happening in this book. These are all moments that took me out of the reading experience and just made me dislike the characters even more, which isn't good because they're the only two characters pretty much that we get to see throughout this book. Just as an example to show the lack of chemistry between the two best friends, there are moments where Gabriella is telling her best friend Parisa, like, hey, you should, like, she's in her narration, she's talking about how she doesn't think Parisa should have anxiety because she's rich, so she has nothing to worry about. This is a very problematic line of thinking here that isn't really challenged throughout the book, in my opinion. And then on the flip side, there's a moment where Parisa is like, oh, Gabriella, you have beauty privilege, which, again, there's a term for this in Gen Z. It's called pretty privilege, not beauty privilege. But I digress. She's like, Gabriella, you have beauty privilege, which is rich coming from the rich girl. She has more privilege than Gabriella, but she constantly sort of makes herself as a victim and talks about how Gabriella, she's the one with all the power in their relationship due to how she looks. It could have sparked a very interesting discussions of like who has it worse or better, I guess. This combined with all the other stuff that's going on, this didn't take forefront and therefore it just kind of fell flat in the end, if that makes sense. So yeah, did not appreciate that. Tone deaf arguments for why they don't dislike each other on both sides, and it just made me dislike them as friends even more. Finally, this book is, like I said, just very jam-packed. It's talking about death, grief, romance in a pandemic, friendship, anxiety on Parisa's side of things, poverty on Gabriella's side of things, just a lot going on, as well as Gabriella trying to reconnect with her estranged family. Just a lot going on for a book that's supposed to be about two best friends trying to survive a pandemic. I feel like that on its own could have been a story, and the other stuff could have just been minor blips instead of these like giant subplots that we have to bring to the forefront. For example, there's a plot point where their former friend, Andrew, he goes to a party during the pandemic and he ends up, spoiler, dying of the edema virus. And there's this whole scene like, oh, he was such a great guy. They have like an online funeral for him, but it's like we as a reader don't know this character. We've only had like a couple anecdotes from both of the main characters combined about this guy that they hung out with for like half of their high school experience. So yeah, we as a reader, we don't really know this kid, and yet we're making a big stink about him dying. Like, I get it's sad. We could have at least been better introduced to him at the beginning, so we would have had more of an emotional connection to him as a character. Which this is a point that other people in the very few bad reviews that I found of this book pointed out. Overall, this was an engaging read, to say the least, a very interesting read. I never found myself bored of the book, because there was always something going on, but in the end I just felt hollowed out, and not in the, oh my god, this book ripped out my heart and stitched it back together, like, no, more like in a why did I read this book way. Well, I don't think I'll be picking up this book again. If you find yourself relating to any of the themes that I mentioned that are discussed in this book, maybe you'll find more joy in this book. I see why people really enjoyed this book. It's timely, it is relevant, it's talking about very important topics. I just felt that it could have been done way better in my opinion. So in the end, I gave it 3 stars. I didn't love it, I didn't hate it, it's just a lot of things annoyed me So hence why this is probably the longest section of this video, because I had a lot to talk about in regards to this book. But guys, those are all of the 6 purple books that I read in the month of June. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. As I said at the beginning of this video, I won't be doing any more wrap-ups until probably the end of September, but you can still look out for more bookish and artsy videos coming this summer. If you like this video, make sure to give it a like, comment down below what you read in the month of June, subscribe, and before you head out, just wanted to mention my debut poetry chapbook, Blue Pearl, is available from Bottle Cap Press. You can use the link in my description box below to get it for 10 bucks. It really helps me and goes a long way to supporting my art and my writing and this YouTube channel. So yeah guys, I hope you have a fantastic day, week, month, whatever you're feeling, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!